We are live. So, welcome to our discussion on the film Hellraiser. Where would the group like to start? For those of you who can't see at home, this room is packed. We're speechless. No wrong answer, I assure you.
Sexual sadism disorder.
Sexual. So, who you identifying here?
Pinhead, all of the other creatures, I forget what it's called.
And
that
Frank,
are
yeah.
into it. Trying to
Cinebite.
teach others how to do it. And
So,
how to
okay, go further. Why sexual sadism, and what is sexual sadism disorder?
deriving sexual pleasure from inflicting pain in extreme measures, sometimes part of paraphilia.
And differentiate for me what a paraphilia is versus a paraphilic disorder, because you had said sexual sadism disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone?
Is the difference that like one is clinically significant? Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a designation the APA made sure was in place as of 2013 with the revision to the DSM-5. So separating out what a paraphilia is versus a paraphilic disorder. Paraphilias are sexual practices that are outside of a cultural norm, but are not disorders because they don't result in clinically significant distress or impairment. Whereas the same behavior that does would be considered a disorder, the paraphilic disorder. Right? So sexual sadism disorder. So you're telling me then that Pinhead's behavior is clinically significant. So is that true?
He has pins in his head.
Well, and like he's inflicting pain onto others that are not consenting. So I would say that's like.
I think that's what we're right. He does pose some risk, some danger to others. So yes, this film probably is perhaps is an over-the-top depiction of sexual sadism disorder. It is apparently a disorder here. Right. He comes in for treatment. And you think psychiatry is going to be boring. So, thoughts? My team can't answer this because we just had this discussion. But believe it or not. Treatment should always be biopsychosocial. So, what are your thoughts?
But CBT is always the answer.
Yeah, psychotherapy is going to be the focus of treating any of the paraphilic disorders. Right? So, and we can get into some details and some specifics in terms of CBT versus others, but that is the theoretical construct is going to be the goodness of fit between the therapist and the individual, in this case, Pinhead. Right? Not sure where he's coming from, but CBT would certainly be one example of that. Other thoughts about Pinhead here? Outside of his sadistic behavior, do you think that he has a genuine disregard for others' rights?
Yeah.
So might there be another condition that you would consider? Yeah, that's got. And we've stated this kind of in previous weeks. When you visit these 80s slasher films, I think antisocial personality is always going to be part of the discussion. But I think this film might be one where we go a little bit deeper. So write the prequel for me. If, in fact, you are going to diagnose Pinhead with antisocial personality disorder, how would you cast the prequel to Hellraiser?
A little kid that looks like a Chucky doll. Bullying other kids in school, getting advice,
And,
down the candy shop.
Conduct disorder.
and right, what are you depicting there, right?
Conduct
Yeah,
disorder.
right. Do you think Child's Play is the prequel to Hellraiser? it's worth the story arc discussion. A little beyond the scope of today's noon discussion. That's an interesting. Anybody here familiar with Child's Play? All right. So, have we talked about Child's Play before?
No.
Anyone? Anything jump out other than conduct disorder in the good guy doll in Child's Play? Maybe looking at Andy's character a little bit.
That's the kid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are we in a world acting like Chucky is coming to life? Are we like just seeing a kid where like a lot of people are dying around him and he's blaming a doll?
Let's go with scenario B.
Okay, then that feels to me like, I don't know, like maybe he's either dissociating or he's transferring like what he himself might be doing to an inanimate object.
Because he's so young.
Let's go with that.
Mhm.
All right. So for those of you who have not seen Child's Play, it's about a little boy who gets a cute doll for a present, and since being gifted this good guy doll, there are these unexplained deaths. And the idea here would be that perhaps this doll is in fact not coming to life, but instead Andy is playing a role. Now, whether he's truly killing anyone versus this being a fantasy is certainly subject to discussion. But let's go with the idea of fantasy play here. Anything else to consider in terms of a differential for the little boy Andy? Yeah, you brought this up. We're down this rabbit hole. If you take a closer look at it, I don't suggest anybody would have done this. There are 4 or 5 deaths in the original Child's Play. Every single one occurs following a scene prior where Andy separates from his mom. So to the extent that these are just thoughts, what might be Andy's thoughts or anxieties in that scenario, and therefore what might Child's Play be a fictional depiction of?
Separation anxiety.
Yeah, and he's at the age where this is actually an appropriate discussion, where individuals, children, have anxiety upon separation from the primary caregiver. And that's exactly what happens here. Every one of these murders follows a scene right before where Andy separates from his mom. Right? So it's a over-the-top depiction of separation anxiety disorder. On your shelf, if up to 18 months, I want you to make sure you choose normal behavior, right? Differentiating or separating, pardon the pun, separation anxiety from separation anxiety disorder. The disorder is developmentally inappropriate anxiety, which means that they're beyond 18 months. Now, on the shelf exam, you're not going to get a 19-month-old. Right? That's the good news. But you do have to identify that the 6 or 7 or 9-year-old is beyond that stage in which the separation anxiety would be deemed normal. Children, 8, 9, 10, do not present with anxiety, with a chief complaint of anxiety or nervousness. How do they present?
Stomachache.
Good. Somatically or
Irritability.
or behaviorally, right? And Andy's irritable because he's murdering these people. Right? So again, a little bit of a metaphor, but he's clearly got behavioral or conduct manifestations of his anxiety, of his separation anxiety. Right? So 9 times out of 10, when separation anxiety disorder is your single best answer, it'll be around an 8 or 9-year-old who presents with either a change in behavior or somatic complaints, headache, stomachache. Now, how do you differentiate this condition from agoraphobia, this condition from social anxiety disorder?
Well, social anxiety and like agoraphobia happen in like certain settings and like their reactions to certain experiences.
Tell me more about what you mean by certain settings.
So like usually with social anxiety, you'd have it like public speaking or like certain interactions, like social interactions with people. And agoraphobia could often be like going to the store, like very specific experiences.
Okay. And that's true. So I put words in your mouth. What I'm hearing then is that while separation anxiety really focuses on where the individual is separating from, those other 2 illnesses have much more to do with where they're going to. Right? And then once you understand that it isn't where they're separating from, that the specificity is where they're headed to, the next question for the clinician, the next question for the test taker is, what is the fear? Right? If the fear is of the performance or social situation itself, we're going to call it social anxiety disorder. If it's about fear of embarrassment, of not being able to escape given symptoms, then we're going to call it agoraphobia. And you mentioned it already, it's worth restating. What is the most common example of social anxiety disorder?
Public speaking.
Right. And matter of fact, in 2013, with the publication of the DSM-5, performance subtype is actually a thing now. All right. Here's your test question. A course director presents with anxiety. When asked, he notes that he has debilitating anxiety when he gets in an East lecture hall behind a podium. What's the next question you want to ask him?
Like, what is he doing behind the podium? What is he speaking?
What is the
Or-
fear?
Yeah.
He tells you that because of the way the doors are situated, he's not going to be able to escape that East lecture hall in time in the event of becoming symptomatic. Single best answer. Agoraphobia. So I gave you a public speaking engagement where the single best answer is agoraphobia. So read the test question carefully. All right. All right. So that teases out the three anxiety disorders. Any other observation before we leave Child's Play? All right, back to our case, Hellraiser. Anything else you want to discuss in the context of Pinhead? Let's say that this character provides no evidence of conduct prior to the age of 15. Now what? You're not going to be convinced that he has regard for others' rights, right? What's your next step here? What are you thinking?
Well, could it be like, because I think some of it was that he is trying to be like the moral arbiter of like who's worthy and who's not, because the whole thing is that like he punishes Frank specifically. So could you say that's like narcissism?
Could be, right? So now we're dealing with narcissism, and in as much as there's this like overlap, and of course these two conditions will cluster, right?
Yeah.
We're actually seeing somebody like John Doe from David Fincher's Seven with pins in his face. Is basically what his character turns out to be. A very arrogant, a very haughty individual who has a blatant disregard for and violation of others' rights. So that clustering of narcissism and antisocial personality traits. So that could be it. Mm-hmm. Anything else? And I think, keeping with David Fincher 7, I think Mills actually comments on yet another clinical term that he uses to describe John Doe, Kevin Spacey's character, that we might apply here.
Is this before he meets John Doe in the police station, or is this when they're driving?
When they're driving.
I thought you meant the other 7 movies, so no, I haven't seen this.
There's 2 7 movies.
Yeah, wasn't there the one that you had us watch at one point? There's the with wasn't Brad Pitt in that movie?
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh wait, that's right. I forgot that character was in that movie. Oh,
He calls him a sociopath or a psychopath, right?
I don't know why I thought that. I forgot the guy's name was John Doe. Like
John Doe, yeah.
The bad guy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The bad guy. Pinhead without the pins. Just Mr. Head. John Doe.
Actually, wait, that makes sense.
Psychopath.
That actually
So
makes sense.
differentiate for me psychopathy from antisocial personality disorder. Psychopathy is not likely to come up on your shelf.
And it's not in the DSM.
No, it's not. It's a clinical term. It is not a diagnostic term, which is a hint. Differentiate the two from me.
This is basically somebody with antisocial that doesn't meet all the criteria.
Close, and that could be true. And the criterion that they usually don't meet is the necessary one of having conduct prior to the age of 15, which might be our character here. So maybe not antisocial personality disorder, maybe not the disorder, but a psychopath nonetheless. The idea here is that while there are treatments for the disorder because it is an illness, it's not the case for psychopathy. Right? So the outcomes are going to be different because there's no agreed upon treatments, there are no that the treatment plan is going to be inconsistent and perhaps not evidence-based, lending to poorer outcomes. That's a general idea, which I'm not sure. I mean, I've seen the sequel. Did you see the sequels of? Okay. So in this franchise, let's just say that there are poor outcomes.
Oh.
There's like there's a bunch of them, right?
Yeah.
There's like 7 of them.
It's October. There's no reason why you shouldn't have been watching it, but I won't assign it. I'll be here. All right. Anything else here?
Could you actually like spell out the difference between sociopathy and psychopathy? Because I feel like they're used very interchangeably.
They're used interchangeably. While psychopathy is an arbitrarily agreed upon clinical term, sociopathy is not. So it is often used interchangeably only because there is no consensus of what a sociopath is. Right? That's more of a term that might be used outside of clinical circles. Right. So when used and used interchangeably, just note that the arbitrarily agreed upon clinical term here is psychopathy. Okay. Now, we actually had a master's student provide a literature search on that very question. And what they found was basically there is no clear answer, so that is the answer. But if there was any evidence that might suggest that there's something there to discuss, it's that the individual with psychopathy lacks both empathy and compassion, right? And you need one for the other, right? So when you achieve empathy, you begin to recognize that others have other viewpoints and perspectives, and with that, you can then develop compassion. In the absence of achieving empathy, you can't become compassionate. You can't be compassionate, right? So the idea here is that the psychopath lacks both empathy and compassion. That's the general consensus. Okay, general. You could easily find studies that talk about the opposite, but there was some degree of consistency with the research with regard to that idea. On the other hand, these articles that are written for sociopathy paint a little bit of a different picture, and that is the individual has a capacity for empathy, but do not have compassion. Right. So take me through a scenario in which we can see that, and then maybe the term sociopath could be applied.
Perhaps somebody who knows that someone recently like lost a loved one and is able to like empathize with that pain and use pretend maybe they themselves lost a loved one, so that the other person then like counter empathizes, and then they can use them to oh, now can I get off work or something like that. Like you have to understand the grief of the other person and recognize that in order to use it kind of in your favor. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Just clarify for me what your example of is of using it in your favor.
Oh, maybe it's like your boss or something like that, and you use that to like get time off work, or you use it to like maybe like negotiate for a raise or something. Like I have to support my family now that like my dad is dead, your dad is not dead, or something, you know.
Manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably use a little bit of a different example for that second part of the process, but you're exactly right. You're exactly right. It's that ability to see from someone else's perspective, and then gaining that perspective to manipulate and use it for your own good. Where I thought you were going with this example was you're empathizing using the exact same example, and now you take advantage of them knowing that they're vulnerable, right? So all of a sudden their bank account's cleared out because of the way you manipulated that. So incompassionate, but the capacity for empathy.
Is this also like with serial killers when they feign like illness or like injury and then they get somebody to help them?
Could be, yeah. It could be, yeah. For those who lack empathy, if they just are reading from a script and trying their best to play a role, they are more likely to be discovered as superficial or faking it, and probably frightening, where people may not be nearly as willing to walk in the house with them or whatever it is they're trying to do. You're exactly right. Yeah, that was Bundy.
Yeah, I was thinking of that one.
Right. But again, that's not necessarily arbitrarily agreed upon, but in a small sample of the research that was reviewed, there was evidence of that. This whole idea of empathy versus compassion. Pinhead. In this context, sociopath or psychopath?
Okay, I was gonna say, I was gonna say sociopath, but I think it's psychopath because I don't think he can necessarily have empathy because they explain that the Cenobites something like they don't really understand the difference between pain and pleasure. So then how can they understand empathy, I guess. But otherwise, if that detail is written out, I would say sociopathy because there's a moral basis that they run.
They're operating from their own base of morality. They are. That doesn't necessarily mean they're empathetic, but it's worth a discussion. Yeah, I don't know. I would probably err on the side of psychopathy here. I don't think it's antisocial personality. Even if he has evidence of conduct prior to the age of 15, I'm not sure he's amenable to treatment. For whatever that's worth. All right.
I also kind of wanted to ask too, especially because I know we previously talked about the cultural. I forgot the term that we used during Skeleton Key, but the cultural illness so considering the Cenobites are not human and they come from a different world, is it actually fair to hold them to the standards
It's a great question.
Human empathy and compassion, or to them, are we psychopaths?
Right. And the easy answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not fair. And we have to appreciate where they're coming from. It's a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
It is. But I also remember in the context of the discussion of the Skeleton Key that if the behavior, while culturally sanctioned in one's home country and one's own culture, is resulting in clinically significant distress or impairment in self or others, in this case others, then where are we? And again, that's more of a clinical question. That's not one you're really going to see on a shelf exam. But that line to draw is always clinical significance. And even if he's from further regions of the whatever it is that he says, his behavior is in fact significantly impacting others.
Yeah.
So he'd still be amenable to treatment, or he'd still be someone we'd call disordered. It's a great question, though. And you're right. A remake of this where we see things. They did it with the Wizard of Oz. They can do it with anything. Where we see things through the Cenobite eyes. And by the way, I think we're going to get a little bit of that today. I do want to discuss that a little bit, but not before we delve into some other characters. Any other characters you care to discuss in this case study? Frank.
Maybe it's too close to Pinhead, but it is interesting because he is from our culture and he is a human and he has sought this thing out. But it's also he didn't know what he was asking for, but then in getting back to where he was, he kind of becomes the thing that he despises so much. So, and then on top of that, all the sadomasochism that led him to search for the box in the first place.
100%. Yeah. And sadomasochism, I wonder what else.
Yeah.
If you have to go to Tibet to find this key that opens another dimension, your current world, your current reality is just not holding anything for you. And what has he done to actually reach this level? We see a terrific parallel between this character and, of all people, Pinhead, where there's likely sexual sadism disorder, probably other paraphilias. Certainly a degree of antisocial personality disorder, query whether or not there is a pre-existing condition of conduct disorder. Basically the same character without the pins.
So he's just John Doe then?
He's just John Doe. Yeah. Anything else with Frank?
He says, from what I remember, I didn't rewatch it this time, but when I watched it, he was very creepy towards Christy, right? I guess Kirsty, is his niece, right?
That was my next question too. We mentioned that there's likely evidence of sexual sadism disorder in this individual, maybe even sexual masochism disorder as well. What else? Did I already pick up on the pedophilia?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a critical teaching point from that's a clinical pearl, and that is individuals who rule in for a paraphilia, on average, have 3 to 4. So for healthcare providers, it's a little difficult probing this information. Once you probe and once you ask, once you get over that barrier and you get an answer and you find something, that's not the time to stop. Right? And the studies show that individuals who have a single paraphilia, on average, have 3 to 4. Right? So, and this is a great example with Frank, because, of course, we picked up on it because we just watched everything unfold in front of us. But if we were to ask and we were to rule him in after a psychiatric evaluation for sexual sadism disorder, without further asking, if we just took a victory lap, we might miss the fact that he is also a pedophile. Anything else, Frank?
Perhaps whatever drove him to sleep with his brother's fiance, like the week before the wedding, like that feels very personality disorder, like senses of narcissistic or maybe even histrionic, like personality disorder.
Yeah, again, there's an element of narcissism there. I mean, again, if I recall correctly, he slept with her on the morning of her wedding on her bed with the wedding dress there. I mean, it's just very symbolic.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about defying cultural norms, defiling cultural norms. And I don't know if she was actually consenting. Right? I mean, we could talk about Julia, but
At least the first time. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not so sure. But that could be, what do you, well, we may as well discuss her. What do you think about this character?
Maybe like dependent personality disorder.
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
Yeah. So the individual who has dependent personality disorder, we have to be a little careful here because of the idea or the construct of dependency can be used a little differently. Individuals with the actual disorder need constant affirmation for their every next step. They need reassurance so as to move forward with tasks, etc. Do you see that here?
No, not with her own tasks, but she's very driven to help Frank in any means necessary, including endangering her own family. So that part of it is kind of dependent.
And while I think that means we have to evaluate for dependent personality disorder, if we do probe, and again, we have to watch the prequel, but there might be a chance that we find out that there is no further evidence. And if that's the case, we have to come up with another reason for the behavior that we observe. And let me also then provide the further details that prior to meeting Frank, no signs of dependency. That is, no clinical criteria of dependent personality disorder, which of course, as a personality disorder, would be an enduring pattern of behavior. Let's say it's absent in the prequel, and its incident, that is, its onset, is upon meeting Frank Cobb. Now what?
Well, it can't be a personality disorder.
Yeah, I think we're going to rule that out, yeah.
Like an abusive relationship, could you say? Like,
I think there's no doubt it was an
I guess
abusive
I mean like in someone who would present that way, like could they present that way without there being abuse in the relationship?
It could. But in this case, I think it's
Well,
fair to say
yeah,
it was
yeah.
abuse. So then what? What might be going on here then if that's the case?
Like emotional abuse?
I think there was emotional abuse. I think there were other forms of abuse too. But what's the behavior then that we're likely seeing?
Could it be like reaction formation
It
issues?
could be. That could be an underlying defense.
Stockholm syndrome.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Now again, I mean, I don't want to make excuses for Julia, but I would have to probe the Stockholm syndrome here, where she's identifying, and identification is going to be another defense mechanism along with reaction formation to consider here, especially if Julia entered therapy. Right. So identification with the aggressor, that's the Stockholm syndrome. Right.
She also potentially suffers from PTSD with just the amount of like intrusive thoughts and also like general avoidance in other settings of discussing things like that.
And the fact that she's like so attached to him, like it, maybe like the PTSD also came from the incident where they initially like had the affair, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't
we would
consensual.
definitely have to probe that. There's no doubt about that. So, if she happens to rule in for PTSD, and oh, by the way, the backstory to Pinhead suggests that the same might be in play for this character, because I think I want to say Hellraiser 3, we learned that he actually was in wartime combat.
What, Frank? Or,
Yeah, no,
or
Pinhead.
So Pinhead is human?
Hmm?
Pinhead is human?
He used to be. I don't
Oh,
know
wait,
I don't know
I
what he
didn't-
is now.
oh.
He's angels to some, demons to others. But yeah, he was. Yeah, at one time, and it was during the war, during combat, where he ended up becoming Pinhead. Excuse me. So there might be an element of PTSD here as well. So nice parallel between Pinhead and Julia. Right. If Julia does rule in for post-traumatic stress disorder, what other disorders must we now evaluate for, knowing they have significant comorbidity with PTSD? There are 3 others that we really have to well, depression, of course. 3 others.
Like an eating disorder?
Eating disorder, yeah.
Anxiety.
That's
Or does
PTSD.
that count? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Other anxiety disorders, sure. Yeah, they're going to be. The depressive anxiety spectrum is definitely on the table. In addition to that,
like an addiction, substance use disorder.
we always have to evaluate for substance use too. So similar to depressive anxiety spectrum, substance use disorder must always be at the very forefront of our clinical minds.
Is it dissociative identity?
Yes, DID. Any evidence of DID in this movie?
I didn't watch it, to be honest. I'm not a horror movie
Well-
person. And I
I like your honesty. You nailed it. You nailed
I
it.
watched
Yeah.
the trailer and called it a day.
Well, it would only be DID though, like if the trauma happened when they were a child.
Right. But
Otherwise, it
again,
would be like a dissociative disorder in general.
one more. Borderline personalities.
Oh, but that would also be childhood trauma too.
Yeah. Right, which then suggests, and again, this is something, it's a clinical pearl. When an individual provides an event, a traumatic event, the clinician should never stop probing, because it's very likely that this initial trauma occurred years prior to when they're reporting. And that might also include there being amnestic for the event, because during the actual trauma, they dissociated. Therefore, they failed to integrate those memories. Right. But borderline personality. Now, borderline personality is interesting in terms of discussing what's going on with Julia, because of the way this whole movie shapes up, and it also incorporates the idea that there's a moral base to the main character that's Pinhead. Because when you look at that, and when you now fold in the discussion of Julia, this is actually a remake of a Greek myth called the Oresteia. So, I'm not putting you guys on the spot. The camera's
I
not
don't
on you,
remember.
I promise. Oresteia? What the heck is that?
Can you give like a character name from the? Because I might not know that.
The character name for Oresteia?
Or like where's the cast in Oresteia?
Yeah, where the other people.
The other people in Oresteia? Sure. Definitely. Other than Orestes himself,
Orestes.
it would be Agamemnon,
Oh.
the Spartan king.
Yes.
And history doesn't agree with me, but he caused the Trojan War.
Yeah.
Right now, after the war in Troy, there's a sequel. There are multiple sequels. One we all heard of. It's called the Odyssey, and that's about one of the Greek heroes, Odysseus, returning back to his kingdom in Ithaca. But there's another co-occurring sequel called the Oresteia, where Agamemnon returns back to his kingdom in Sparta. What happens to King Agamemnon? Take a guess what happens to him.
He died.
Yeah. So he actually comes back with a concubine, Cassandra.
On top of the wife that he fought for.
Mhm.
Right.
No, he didn't fight for her. He fought for his lover, Helena Troy.
Oh, sorry, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. That's a little.
Live.
Yeah. But Clytemnestra is his wife,
Yes.
who herself has taken on a lover, in the king's absence and plan to assassinate him, and they do. And they stab him repeatedly. The assassination of Agamemnon is the first book in the trilogy of the Oresteia. Okay, Orestes, his son, is going to avenge the death. We're going to get to that in a second. So what's interesting here is that Clytemnestra is translated literally into, quote, classic cutter. And her counterpart in the modern day version of the Oresteia called Hellraiser happens to be Julia, right? Who might have borderline personality, classic cutter. Now the other interesting thing too is that I know she uses a hammer in the movie. In the book, in the Hellbound Heart, she uses a knife. Right? So there is some linkage between this story and the Greek myth, the Oresteia.
Is it Killing of the Sacred Deer also? Or is it it's one of the characters from the Oresteia?
I'd have to double check that. I don't think it's the
Because it's
the same
Iphigenia
house.
thing. I
Yeah.
guess it's just connected to the story that's similar to that.
Is this Saint Cassandra that was like the oracle prophecy?
That was my next idea. Yeah, thank you. Louder. Say it again.
Wasn't she like an oracle prophecy? I was trying to like rack through my brain. I was like, I thought she was like with Apollo, like not
Well,
with
not
them.
actually.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Yeah.
especially with Apollo.
Yep, exactly right. Right. So, Cassandra, the concubine, has a past history with Apollo, and having shunned him, he curses her. She gets to foresee the future, but nobody will ever believe her. So she actually foretells the death of Agamemnon, but he doesn't believe her, as per Apollo. That's Kirsty. Right? I mean, I know it's an '80s slasher film, so nobody's going to believe any final
Yeah.
but the fact is that there's a parallel here of multiple characters between these two stories. So let's talk about Kirsty a little bit. Again, the modern day Cassandra. By the way, anybody here watch the 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis? I'll leave it alone. All right. By the way, it's not horror, so no smirks. See you guys behind your masks. It's actually more of a mystery thriller, but nonetheless. Kirsty, what's going on here? Other than the fact that nobody believes her.
Well, it's actually interesting because I feel like she's coming into her own like sexual awakening too, especially at the beginning of this movie with her new boyfriend and all that, and then she's almost like thrown into this world on the completely other, more violent end of the spectrum from what she's just beginning to experience. So there has to be like some psychological turmoil when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she also concludes the movie with the same person that she had like the sexual awakening with in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is to unpack beyond that. I just thought that was interesting.
No, I think it's all true. With that as a backdrop, I'm also concerned about her relationship with Frank. Right. I mean, we talked about it from Frank's perspective. We have to also appreciate it from the victim's perspective too, and what that means in all this. So I know we already talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, and every '80s slasher film is about PTSD, so I get it. But this is one character that we wouldn't forget that either. The other condition I want to talk about is delusional disorder. I know that, to the extent that we watch these movies, we're putting ourselves in the characters' places, and, there are these fourth dimension monsters coming through the walls and things, so we're hiding our eyes. But the fact is that if Kirsty presented to you with a chief complaint of blank, I'm not so sure you'd readily say, oh, it's because you're being, persecuted by the Cenobites. And if you were to think that, if you were on call and then you called your attending, which, for example, would be me, I don't think you'd be brave enough to tell me that. So I would ask what's going on, and upon your explaining to me that story, that is the plot of Hellraiser, one of the things I think you'd consider is a delusion. There's this belief that is not bound in reality, right? So we have reviewed this in the past. Seems like a good time to review this again. What are the 5 different themes of delusion, and therefore the 5 different subtypes of delusional disorder?
Grandiose.
Right, great.
Cursive.
Good.
I'm gonna say it wrong again. Ergomatic.
Erotomanic, good. 3 down, 2 to go.
Somatic.
One to go, somatic.
Unspecified.
That's fair. Okay. So still one to go. And there's mixed as well. There's still one more. Did we say
forget
jealous?
all- I always forget.
No.
all.
Jealous. Again, the acronym is JPEGs, right? JPEGs, right? Jealous, persecutory, erotomanic, grandiose, somatic, and then, of course, mixed or unspecified. Good. Which one, if we thought that this was a delusion and therefore delusional disorder, which subtype do we think might fit Kirsty?
Persecutory.
Yeah, I think that's where I would go with this. Now, in order to rule in delusional disorder, what are the other steps we have to take to confirm this diagnosis?
Other psychiatric condition.
Yeah.
And then it's definitely not bound in reality. Like
Right.
that something's really happening or something like that.
And the one you have to think of is schizophrenia, schizoaffective, right? Because if somebody has pre-established schizophrenia and are presenting with clinically significant delusions, the clinician's going to recognize that the delusions are part of schizophrenia. That is, schizophrenia is defined through delusion. So why wouldn't it be due to that pre-existing condition? Is there any evidence that Kirsty has schizophrenia?
Well, if we're still potentially treating her like she has delusions, and then the Cenobites aren't really there, then it's a pretty strong, like, audiovisual hallucination happening. So
Yeah.
that's already 2 out of the 5 criteria.
And would you feel comfortable even saying that if anyone were to observe the way she had been acting during this time, that she might have bizarre or disorganized behavior as well?
Yeah.
She might have 3, so that is a concern here. I don't know her actual age, mid-20s?
Actually, I thought
Maybe a little younger.
Really?
Yeah, I thought
Little
she
younger?
was like fresh into it.
All right, so that's concerning
I can-
too.
Yeah.
Right, this is the age of onset as well. So it's a consideration. And if there's co-occurring mood symptoms, we may have to even think of schizoaffective disorder, right? The condition in which individuals present meeting criteria for schizophrenia with concurrent manic or depressive symptoms, which would equal schizoaffective. So, but I guess we'd have to leave that in our differential. A couple other things you have to consider as well in this patient as we're continuing to work up a potential delusional disorder now, rule out schizophrenia. 2 other things.
No other medical condition.
Yeah. Now she's young and she's female, which means on a shelf exam she's healthy, unless otherwise specified. All right. So, is it specified in this money? Is there anything actually in the script that she's got an underlying medical illness? No. So if we're going to treat Kirsty's case like a shelf question, she's healthy. And then one more?
Substance?
Yeah. So what 5 substances must we consider here in terms of their acute intoxication syndrome resulting in psychosis?
Alcohol.
Alcohol 1,
LSD.
hallucinogens 2,
Amphetamine?
stimulants 3,
That sauce.
stimulants 4, stimulants 3. I could count.
Marijuana?
I heard, what?
Inhale.
Inhalants 4, I think we have one more, right? What did you say?
Another cancer stimulant.
Is marijuana?
Yes, that's the 5th one.
Oh,
Okay. Anybody here watch Paranormal Activity 3? I'm sorry.
3.
No, sorry. That was, I have 3 in my brain. That's another story. Anybody here ever see Paranormal Activity?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Give me the characters.
Also Kirsty. Isn't there a Kirsty in
Yeah,
it?
there's a Kirsty there. 2 more characters.
Oh, I don't even
Kirsty's
remember.
husband.
Remember?
Yeah, that's exactly how I remembered it. I'm like, there's the wife. and
His
the
name is
husband.
Micah,
Oh.
right? And his name actually serves as the acronym. So if you ever watch that movie and think, hey, this might be all substance induced, it's kind of cool because if it's taken from the perspective of Micah, M-I-K-A-H, there's your substances. In this case, the M, you have to allow me to cheat, is methamphetamine and other stimulants. I, inhalants. C, cannabis. A, alcohol. H, hallucinogens. Micah. So, again, not this movie, but one that's almost as awesome.
I don't like either of these. That's what we say.
Paranormal Activity, right? Paranormal
It's
Activity.
okay. I mean, it's like, I guess for its time, it's really good. But I don't really like that.
Oh, you're old. Anything else with Kirsty?
Well, if she was like say hypothetically like a frequent cannabis user in her youth, wouldn't that also predispose her for schizophrenia as she
Potentially, yeah. Yeah. Did we see that?
No.
Oh, okay.
explicitly.
Prequel,
No,
right?
I just
Pre-
yeah.
No, listen.
Yeah.
Definitely something to consider here. Yeah, it's very.
It is the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Any other characters you want to discuss in Clive Barker's Hellraiser?
Larry.
What's going on with Larry?
Well, it's just like all of this stuff is like, I don't know, woefully oblivious. I don't think it's a DSM criteria. But
Yeah.
it should be.
Access 6. Yeah.
God.
But it's like also the coping mechanism because his wife clearly doesn't love him and his daughter is like farther away from him, not emotionally, but definitely physically for the first time.
And he clearly is not close to his brother.
No.
Yeah.
The guy died.
Yeah, give me the background. I know that he's moving into his new house, which was his family's house, so there's a recent death of a loved one, right?
Or was it? Because Frank has been squatting there for a very long time.
It's been a very long time?
Supposedly,
I can't
that's why all
remember.
his stuff is there.
I can't.
Okay. All right. So, do we know why he and Julie are moving in now at this time?
There are like hints of marital conflict and like fresh starts when they're going through that.
So we're gonna move. Because moving's not a stress. Okay.
Beginning of so many horror movies.
I was just
Yeah,
thinking
it just
that.
says he intends to rebuild his relationship with his second wife. Otherwise, it doesn't say anything in the plot,
Okay.
like synopsis.
All right. So I had been under the impression that maybe this was fairly incident to the death of either his mother or his father, and they recently vacated, because that would be similar to Gone Girl,
Yeah.
where you have someone who is clearly, Julia's not in agreement here, but neither was Amy, in terms of moving to Missouri, so that Nick could be closer to his mother, and then she dies, and then they're left in Missouri, which is perfectly fine. But strange parallel there. I'm not suggesting that Julia and therefore not Frank. Larry, has the same illness that Nick Dunn may have. That's, but I just wonder if there's depression here. Not really good. I'm not sure what's going on here. Clearly his parents are deceased. That was their house. How long ago they passed away, I don't know. He's not close to his brother, to say the least. He's estranged. It seems like he's getting more and more estranged from his daughter, and he and Julie have marital issues. So there's something going on with this character. And if it's not cause and effect, where the chicken and the proverbial egg, certainly there's some correlation. So a depressive illness is probably at the top of our list here. Very quick rundown, and we'll finish here with the depressive illnesses. Okay. I think everybody should feel comfortable about major depressive disorder, right? Give me the subtypes.
Like with psychotic features. Like
That's one.
without.
Hmm?
Without.
That's still one.
Oh.
Melancholic, good.
Atypical.
Atypical, good.
Postpartum.
Postpartum is not considered a subtype. It's considered to be a course specifier. But yes, a peripartum depression, a peripartum onset, yes. 50% of individuals with peripartum depression have the onset of symptoms during the pregnancy. Hence the DSM-5 change from postpartum depression to peripartum depression, or major depressive disorder, peripartum onset. So the acronym is CAMPS, C-A-M-P-S. Right. Number one, catatonic. Right, catatonic. There are two A's. You got one of them, right? Atypical. The other A is anxious subtype. Anxious. And the two M's. I heard melancholy or melancholic. The other one is mixed, specifically with manic features. P, I heard psychotic. And then the final one is seasonal. Any questions about any of the subtypes?
Why is seasonal not a course in the way that
It should
Sure-
be.
Oh, okay.
Because the APA says so. It should be.
Okay.
And it is. I mean, these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So it's published as a subtype, and it's also published as a course specifier too. So it is. I think your question for those of us in the room that are OCPD is, if that is the case, why not just like delete it from the? I don't know. Maybe they will. Define for me persisting depressive disorder, that condition that was previously known as the stymic disorder.
2 years.
2 years with less, can't be more than like 2 months of like symptom freeness.
Good. Right. And 2 years of what? Just make sure we're on the same.
Subclinical, like it's not enough to qualify for MDD, so maybe like 4 hours a night.
2. The rule of twos.
Ah.
Yeah. Siggy caps. There's a little bit of a discrepancy, but basically it's Siggy caps. 2 symptoms for at least 2 years without 2 months of symptom resolution or inter-episode recovery. Yeah. And so that's the rule of twos that define persisting depressive disorder. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
It's like a period of having depressive symptoms that cycles. It doesn't have to align with your period, but it often does.
And talk to me a little bit more about aligning. What do you mean?
Like with the onset of the menstrual period, patients will get depressive symptoms, but then it will resolve afterwards and cycle.
The week prior to the onset,
Yeah.
right? And then with the menses, it terminates, right? So and that has to be established 2 consecutive cycles. Happens once. It just happened. But with two consecutive cycles, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is really not a true mental disorder. So at some point, the DSM will delete it because it is an example of a depressive disorder due to another medical condition. What's the actual medical condition? What's the etiology of it?
Like premenstrual syndrome? Like PMS?
HPA axis, like.
No. I want the hormone.
Estrogen? Progesterone? Had to be one
Yeah.
of the 2, right?
So the onset of symptoms the week prior to is consistent with the peak of progesterone. And then resolving the week after is when progesterone is at its lowest. Right? So this has everything to do with being due to a medical condition / hormone. Right? It's progesterone. Persisting complex bereavement disorder. It's the final one we'll talk about today from the depressive disorder spectrum. What the heck is that?
Grief after 12 months.
Yes.
Lasting for 6 to 12 too, right?
Is that?
It has to last for 6 to 12 months also for it to be persistent complex.
I have to double check that. You're probably right. Right. I know that the APA is trying to get away from actual
Putting a
timeline.
timeline
Yeah.
on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's clinically significant, which then does differentiate it from grief or bereavement. Okay? Grief is the feeling, bereavement is the symptom. Both are normal. Okay? When extended or when it incorporates symptoms that are beyond which we would expect, we call it persisting complex bereavement disorder, otherwise complicated bereavement for short, which is a bridge to major depression. Individuals with this condition do have a risk for developing major depressive disorder. So it's that bridge that connects. Part of this definition, persisting complex bereavement disorder, is that the individual does not reach full criteria for a major depressive episode, right? So that they don't reach 5 symptoms. Okay. Questions? Any other observations or comments on Hellraiser? We're good? All right, we'll stop it there.